Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron and today we're going to be doing another tier list of Deep Rock Galactic. We rated all of the primary weapons last time, so this time we're going to be rating all of the secondary weapons. We're going to go class by class. This is not going to be considering overclocks for these weapons either. And then I will be rating them purely based on my own opinion, and I would love to hear your opinion down in the comments below. We will be doing this once again once I've tested out all the overclocks of these weapons, and then ranking them once again. But let's begin with driller stuff, which is the pistol and the EPC. So the driller's pistol is exactly what you would kind of expect from a pistol. It's a semi-automatic pistol that holds 12 rounds. It has a pretty good rate of fire. It is very accurate, even at longer ranges. It's quite accurate. It does lowish damage to enemies. You get a lot of bullets with it, which is pretty nice. The best thing about the pistol is that it's your strongest, or I guess best ranged weapon, because all of your weapons are close range. This is the only gun that can actually fire accurately at longer ranges. So it does have that going for it, but it does do low damage. It does well against small enemies. You can one-shot swarmers pretty easy. You can usually 2 to 3 shot grunts if you hit them in the head. So it's not that bad there. You can shoot down flying enemies with it. This is actually probably your best weapon for shooting down flying enemies, assuming they're not getting real close or you're inside of a cave or something where you can use your cryo cannon or flamethrower. Like, overall it suits drillers' needs, but I still wouldn't consider it one of the strongest secondaries. I'd consider it a pretty average secondary, and that's not a bad thing. With its upgrades or with its modifications, you can customize it a couple ways. You could go with a very accurate high damage pistol, but it's still not doing that high damage, but at least you're doing more damage to like flying things and things that are far away. So that can be okay. You can go with just all clip capacity and ammo and just spam fire the gun, which is what I usually do, and I find that to be pretty useful. And for that, I'd probably put it in high C tier, right up next to the assault rifle that Scout has. It works. And it's usually the secondary I take more often with driller, but it's still nothing like spectacular for a secondary. It's okay, and it does complement their primaries pretty well, but not one of the strongest secondaries, I'd say. With overclocks, it actually does get pretty good, and I do enjoy using it then. Well, at least with one overclock in particular. There's a couple fun ones for it, though. Alright, moving on to the EPC. Now, the EPC is kind of a hard one to quantify because on one hand, as a weapon, it's honestly kind of mediocre. It can do good damage at close to medium range. It can do really well against swarmers and the jellyfish and any other small enemies with its powered up attack. You can do pretty good damage with its with its full charge, but at the same time, you can overheat it really easy, and then you have to wait for it to go on cooldown so you can use it again. You don't need to reload this weapon, which is kind of a bonus, but with how easily it is to overheat, I do find myself overheating it about at the same time I would need to reload something like the regular driller pistol. It also works really good as a tool. It's actually a really useful tool for driller because you can shoot down things like chunks of gold, things like nitra, any sort of material with this just by destroying the environment around it. So as a tool, it's actually really good. It's really useful for driller to have that, because you could also save allies that might have died up high, and you can knock out the ground below them so that you can have them fall down so you can res them. So it has a lot of utility to it, but as a weapon itself, it's really not all that great. I don't use this weapon all that much as a weapon. I use it much more as a tool. And then kind of as a weapon if there's flying things around and it's at medium to closest range. Assuming they're not so close that I can either use my flamethrower or my cryo cannon. So with that, it's like, as a weapon, I would consider this probably one of the worst weapons in Deep Rock without overclocks. With overclocks, it can actually be a pretty decent weapon if you build it like all damage and all the charge up attack, where you can kill lots of small things very easily with it. This as a weapon is probably like low C or D tier, in all honesty, without overclocks. This as a tool, though, I'm thinking like A or B tier, because it's so useful for just mining and getting teammates out of bad situations. I think I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle of B tier, because I just don't know where to put it. And that being my reasoning. As a weapon, it falls lower. As a tool, it might go higher. So I guess I'll put it on the bottom of B tier. All right, up next is the Gunner's secondaries. So first up, we got the Revolver. And the Revolver is a really good secondary. It has high accuracy, it has a pretty fast rate of fire, although it does have limited clip capacity, high damage, and it reloads fairly well. You don't get a whole lot of ammo for the Revolver, but that's usually okay because you're going to be using this much like a very accurate gun. You can use it as an AoE weapon. With certain overclocks, that's actually really strong too. The Revolver might actually be one of the craziest weapons with overclocks compared to all the others. Just as a base weapon, it's still really solid. It does well against grunts. You can usually one-shot them if you hit them in the head on any difficulty. You can shoot long-range enemies like spitters. The Revolver is all around a really solid option. You can build it a couple different ways. You can go with more of a forgiving Revolver where you're doing AoE damage, which can be really good against small enemies. And it can be pretty decent against flying enemies too. With overclocks, that build gets way better, as without overclocks, it's kind of just okay. You could just go ammunition and damage, which is a really strong combination with the Revolver. You could go all damage, which essentially just turns this into a mini sniper rifle, which is really good for a secondary. With like all ammo and high damage, it's just a pretty quality build all around. There's nothing really bad about the Revolver. And I would say it's probably one of the strongest secondary weapons. I'm going to put this one up into high A tier. Up next, we have the burst pistol that Gunner has. This weapon usually gets a lot of hate or a lot of flack because it's not as good as the Revolver. And yeah, that's pretty true. It's not as good as the Revolver, but the Revolver is kind of a pretty insane weapon to be comparing it to anyway. It's kind of insane to be comparing pretty much any of the secondaries to, with a few exceptions. So yeah, it's not going to perform as well as the Revolver usually. However, this is better for people that don't have the best accuracy, who just like to run and gun, or who like to spray and pray kind of. You do have some pretty decent modifications for this too. You could go full ammunition and make it very good at killing grunts, killing swarmers, things like that. You could go with more accuracy and have it do decently well at longer ranges. It's still not going to be as accurate as like the Revolver at very long ranges, and it is kind of annoying that there is no modification to set this to either like full auto or semi-auto. It has to be burst fire, which means you're likely going to be using up more ammunition than you need to kill enemies, which I just personally don't like. You can also build this to pretty much just be high damage, and with certain overclocks that actually works really well, where this thing just becomes crazy at very close range. But without them, it's okay at close range. You can use it pretty much like a submachine gun then at very close range to do a lot of damage to a single target, so it's not bad for that. There's quite a few versatile ways to build the burst pistol, and I think it's an overall okay-ish pistol. I'm not going to say it's anything crazy though. I don't know. I think I'm probably also going to put this one into C tier next to the Driller's pistol. It's kind of along those same lines where you do have more options and build paths for the burst pistol, I'd say, than the Driller pistol. But the Driller pistol is generally going to help out the Driller more than the burst pistol is going to help out the Gunner. So I would say that this one is generally better just for the class, but they're both about equal in terms of overall usefulness. Up next, we have Engineer's weapons, and these ones are pretty fun. So first up, we got the Grenade Launcher. And the Grenade Launcher is a very straightforward weapon, and it's pretty good. It's kind of a boring weapon to talk about because it's a grenade launcher. There's a few modifications for it that just make it more of a grenade launcher. You can go with more damage, more AoE, more ammo, potentially different status effects, like if you hit a target directly you can stun them, or if you have something like incendiary rounds in the grenade launcher. It works exactly how you'd think it would, and it's a pretty fun weapon to use. When I say boring, it's more boring to explain. It's pretty fun to actually use the grenade launcher. You don't get a whole lot of shots with it, but you can kill swarms very easily with it. You can hurt big enemies very easily with it. You can build it a couple different ways to where you can use it as a more accurate grenade launcher to try to hit enemies directly from a longer distance. It's still not way great at long distance because you do have to compensate for the actual projectile, both the speed and the drop of the grenade. So it does have some drawbacks there, but overall it's a very solid option as a secondary. plenty of good ways to build it. You can go full ammo build and just bomb a lot of small enemies very easily, or bomb large enemies to soften them up. You can go with high damage and just try to blow up large enemies very easily. You could go with AoE damage, just bigger AoE radius, more AoE damage, and try to kill as many small enemies as possible. It's overall a pretty solid build, as long as you're not blowing up yourself or your teammates, because you can do that kind of easily with a grenade launcher too. I'd probably put the grenade launcher in... it's either high B tier or it's low A tier. I think low A tier, because there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just solid all the way around. And there's not really a wrong way to build a grenade launcher either. Alright, up next we got the Breach Cutter. Breach Cutter is another really good secondary that Engineer has. This one shoots a energy line that goes forward that can just cut through enemies. It rips apart armor. It has some really good mods to it as well. Like the triple line makes it so easy to hit multiple enemies with this. It does have a limited range because you're not going to be shooting the Breach Cutter at anything at long range. It's just too inconsistent due to the projectile speed and where enemies are likely going to be moving. It works really well in hordes though, because you can cut down multiple enemies very easily. It works very good against large enemies. It only really has like two downsides. It doesn't have very much ammo, which, okay, fair enough, it's really high damage. And it doesn't reload very quickly, which can be remedied if you're just running something like Born Ready, where you don't really care. Or where you're running higher clip capacity for it, where you're probably just going to shoot it out and then put it away until the swarm or whatever is gone, and then reload it when there's nothing else around. So managing it isn't too bad. Ammunition, if you go full ammo with it, it can be pretty good too. Going full damage with this actually doesn't seem like such a great option in my opinion. That's not to count overclocks, but the base modifications, just going full damage doesn't seem really necessary with the Breach Cutter. It seems much better to just go with like quality of life things, more ammunition, faster reloads, projectile speed movement, instant projectile rather than the delay on the projectile. All of those just seem better to me than a lot of just going with, you know, full damage Breach Cutter. The full damage Breach Cutter doesn't feel way better than the regular Breach Cutter unupgraded that way. So Breach Cutter, very solid option, and it's going up into A tier too. I'm gonna say it's high A tier. I don't know. I put it on par with like the minigun. I'd say the Revolver might be a little bit more useful because the Revolver is a little bit more versatile than the Breach Cutter, but the Breach Cutter has some ridiculous damage to it. So it just depends on your situation as to which one I'd put higher, but still, very high A tier, good weapon all the way around. Alright, moving on to Scout secondaries. We've got the jerry-rigged Boomstick. Double barrel shotgun as a secondary is pretty awesome. It does very high damage at close range. It does have pretty wide spread, although the spread pattern, or the spread crosshairs, I guess, make it seem like it's going to be less accurate than it is, because this weapon can actually be used at somewhat of a long distance, at least for a shotgun, in this game, and still do fairly well. This weapon does hit like a truck, which is pretty great. It can reload decently quick. It can be shot very fast. You can build this a couple different ways where you want to go with, a lot of ammunition so that you can use it more often. You could go full damage with this and then just destroy anything if you get at very close range to it. You are limited by your ammunition though. You don't get a whole ton of shots with the Boomstick, which is a little bit unfortunate. Overall, the Boomstick, though, is a very solid secondary, and it works extremely well when you combine it with, like, the assault rifle. Then you have a pretty well-rounded loadout for Scout. If you combine it with the battle rifle, you have a very high damage loadout, but you have very limited ammunition. I think the Boomstick, if it had more ammunition, I'd put it higher, but since it doesn't, I think I'm going to put it into high A tier, or high B tier. Pretty solid weapon all the way around. Pretty good. Gets better with overclocks. Some of its overclocks are really fun to use. Alright, and then we've got the dual SMGs for Scout. Dual SMGs have a really high rate of fire, pretty high potential damage per second. But I say potential damage per second because these weapons are rather inaccurate if you're not going with accuracy modifications. You can go full accuracy, you could go full clip size too, and have a pretty decent weapon for medium range, especially against small and medium-sized enemies like grunts, swarmers, anything like that, you can kill pretty quickly with these. You could go full damage and do very well at very close range against large enemies too. It does have some options there. It's a great option if you want to take the battle rifle, the M1000, with these submachine guns, because you actually have a secondary that has a lot of ammunition, so you can be fighting small enemies. That's a pretty well-rounded loadout, regardless of how you build them. It can work pretty well with the assault rifle too, if you want to take that with Scout, because you're very good against small enemies then, and pretty good at most ranges. You're just going to struggle with large enemies, which might not be a big deal if you have other teammates that are better suited for that. It's all around a pretty decent weapon, and I don't see any reason to not put it into like low B tier. It goes well with the assault rifle, and it goes well with the battle rifle. Ammunition can be a little bit of an issue if you're not going with extra ammunition, because you can run through bullets pretty fast. You're going to be reloading this pretty often because it does need to reload, but it reloads very fast. And it doesn't do particularly well at long ranges. You're just not going to be hitting things consistently at long ranges. So it does have a lot of limiting factors, but overall it's a pretty solid option. So yeah, I wouldn't put anything in Deep Rock into D tier where it needs a lot of fixing. I wouldn't put anything into S tier though either, where it's overpowered without the overclocks. There are some pretty solid weapons, especially up here into A tier, where all of these are very solid choices, especially for anybody who doesn't have overclocks or doesn't have some of the stronger overclocks. But we'll talk about those in a separate episode. Tell me what you guys thought about this video. I had a lot of fun making it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so very much for coming here and watching this. I really do appreciate it, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye.